Hi, I'm Louis Jacobson of PolitiFact. There we go. Just wanted to tell you a little bit about what we do. I'm based in the United States, in Washington, D.C., and we are a fact-checking website. We have been around since 2007. I've been there since 2009, so about 13 years. The idea from the very beginning was to help readers make sense of politics and to hold officials in politics accountable for what they say and what they do. It was kind of a new form of journalism. The first name before it actually became PolitiFact was they were thinking of call it the political referee. Basically to serve a referee purpose for all sides and to call out falsehoods or partial falsehoods wherever they came up in politics, regardless of the party. The feeling at the time was that journalism had been weakened too much by side A says this, side B says this, and then sort of throw up your hands and say, you know, we can't really determine who's right, but we'll give both sides their say. While we certainly do want to represent what both sides argue, we do think that we can come to a conclusion in most cases and get past the sort of on the one hand, on the other hand sort of approach. We've tried to be neutral, to try to look at all sides of an issue, to use the most unbiased sources that we can, and then render a decision. Right now we have roughly a dozen state affiliates in addition to our national staff who we train to do the same thing on a state level. And I also teach 2 classes. I trade off semesters between 2 different universities. And I teach students how to do this. So it's not the kind of thing that's overly difficult. A first or second year journalism student in college can learn how to do this. And we publish their fact checks on our website. We try to be as transparent as possible about all our reporting. All of the sources that we use, from databases to documents to news coverage, those are all listed and linked in click links in the story itself, and also listed at the end of the story in a source list that includes everything we used, as well as a list of everybody who we spoke to for the story and the date that we spoke to them, so that readers can check our work. If they don't agree with what we found, then they can click directly to the same charts and graphs that we looked at and the same news coverage we looked at, and come up with their own conclusions based on the same exact information that we saw. When we speak to people, we do require them to be on the record. We don't have sources who are anonymous. If somebody wants to be anonymous, we try to convince them out of it. And if we can't, then we don't use them as sources, because we want our readers to be able to trust us by knowing who we're speaking to and what their background is, and not just be an anonymous source. The way we do it is we choose facts to check. These are a combination of statements in politics, in speeches, on Twitter, Facebook, as well as comments and posts on social media. So Facebook posts, TikTok posts, we find claims in those. And the way we do it is we choose a short statement. We don't do a rating on an entire speech or even an entire paragraph. We try to keep it to a sentence or so, or even part of a sentence if that's the clearest way to fact check it. We want to be very specific about what we're fact checking and make it one factual assertion. And what that is, we turn that into the ruling statement, which is the quote that appears on the top of our article. And that is what we eventually rate on our 6-point truth scale about the accuracy of that statement. So we try to be very clear that we're checking a specific statement, make that very clear in the article. It's at the very top, so that the person being checked in our quote can't say, oh, well, you know, you left this part out or whatever. It's clear what we've done. And we give the whole context of the quote in the story itself, but as far as what we're giving the rating on, we're very straightforward about that. The concept of our truthometer, which you'll see in a minute, that's our 6-point scale, is that truth is not black and white. We don't think that things are true or false and nothing in between. There's a declining level of truth in our 6-point rating scale. The way we decide this is the reporter does all the reporting and the writing. It gets edited by a first editor, and then after the two of them are done with that edit, they kind of agree upon a recommendation for a ruling on the 6-point scale, but that's not final. At that point, two new editors who haven't seen the story at all come in, join with the first editor, and decide on a consensus basis what they think our final rating should be. So here's our rating system. True, the statement is accurate and there's nothing significant missing. Mostly true, the statement also is accurate, but it needs clarification or additional information. Mostly true is a good rating. It's not anything to be ashamed of. And then half true is next. The statement is partially accurate. For the first time we're saying partially accurate, but it leaves out important details or takes things out of context. Next one is mostly false. The statement contains some element of truth, a little grain of truth, but it ignores critical facts that give a different impression. It would give the opposite impression, really, even though it's technically, in some sense, accurate. And then finally, our final two ratings are false. The statement is not accurate. And pants on fire, which is the statement is not accurate and it makes a ridiculous claim. So the way to think about, or at least the way I think about false versus pants on fire, false is somebody speaking just got it wrong. They messed up. They said the wrong thing. Pants on fire is a case where it really should have been obvious to them that they were wrong, and they recklessly went ahead and said what they did. There's a recklessness to it, a sort of not adhering to common sense, and that's what gets a pants on fire. Pants on fire is the least common of our ratings, typically. The other ratings are about equal in percentage, about 18%, I think, which means that actually true and mostly true statements actually are maybe about a third of what we rate, which is fairly good. You know, we don't try to ignore true statements, but what our standard for choosing facts to check is if you read something or you hear something and you wonder, I wonder if that's true. Sometimes it is true, and we'll write that story and we'll give it a good rating. Sometimes it's false or pants on fire, and we'll write that story too. Some key principles that we use: words matter. We pay close attention to the specific wording of a claim. Does it use precise words or mitigating words? For instance, there's a difference between somebody saying that there's a million of something versus saying that there's close to a million of something. Now, it may not downgrade it in the end by all that much, but there is a difference. And if it's not quite a million, but it's fairly close, then somebody who says close to a million is going to get a better rating than somebody who says a million, because they're being overly specific. At the same time as specific words matter, context also matters. We look at the claim in the full context, the comments made before and after it, the question that prompted it, and the point the person was trying to make. So sometimes something might be technically true, but it leaves out a lot of important context. And we don't just simply give somebody credit for being true in the very, very most narrow sense if they're leaving out a lot of extra context that we think is important. Now they won't get a false necessarily, but they'll get something in the middle, depending on how significant the context is that they're leaving out. Burden of proof: people who make factual claims are accountable for their words and should be able to provide evidence to back them up. Now, this doesn't mean that we don't write articles if the speaker doesn't get back to us with their point of view. That's fine. If we can find the information elsewhere, we do reach out. We want everybody to get back to us who are fact-checking, but if they don't get back to us and we found information that disproves what they say, we will go ahead and write that. We do prefer if people get back. Sometimes they think of things in a way that we don't, and they provide some additional context, which is helpful for us. But ultimately, particularly when something's very obscure and it's impossible to find, if they don't get back to us, we do reserve the right to write something skeptical of what they say if they can't back up what they say. Timing, we fact check things at a particular time when that statement is spoken. So if the situation changes a few weeks later, that's something that we don't go back and change the rating on, because there's no way the speaker could have known that things would change in the same way. We fact check people based on what they know and what the world knows at the time that the statement was made. And then a few weeks later, if somebody says a statement about the new information, that's fine. We can fact check that at that point. But we don't go back and change things retroactively because the situation in the world has changed. Choosing facts to check, as I said, is it something that a reasonable person would be curious about? Is it verifiable? And can the item be reported and written in a reasonable amount of time? We don't want to spend 3 months trying to research a statement. Usually our stories can be turned around in a day or two, sometimes even faster, sometimes a little bit longer depending on the complexity. But we do try to maximize the amount of fact checks that we do. We have about a dozen, 12, 13 people probably full-time, and then a bunch of freelancers working part-time. And I think on a typical day these days, we probably do about 10 fact checks published per day. And so some of those come from our state affiliates as well, which I didn't count in the numbers just now. Things we don't fact check opinions, because there's no right or wrong. Taxes are too high. I don't know, some people feel some way about that, and some people feel differently about that. We can't say that one is right or wrong. Now, we may write an explanatory story without a rating. If the two parties are making different arguments about whether taxes are too high, we could do an analytical story and not draw a truth rating conclusion at the end of it, but just to explain to explain to our readers about the topic, and so they're better educated about it, but we don't go forward and say, we think this side is right or this side is wrong. The other thing we don't do is we don't fact check predictions, because we don't know what the future holds, and the speaker doesn't know what the future holds. Now, the speaker, as a politician perhaps, might not be wise in making a prediction, but the fact is that we can't say they're wrong because it hasn't happened yet. So we stay away from those. We try to stick to things that are verifiable. I think I'll stop there and would be happy to take some questions. Yep. I think you.
Should I just shout? I can shout.
Here, it's okay. You can take it. Oh, here.
So, what do you do when people get angry and ask you to change it?
There is a lot of that. Actually, the funny thing is, I think it's a little bit less so now than it was when I first started a decade ago. We used to get a lot of complaints from the campaign people who are running for office, and maybe that's because they don't care about us as much anymore. I don't know. It's not that frequent that we get pushback from the candidates or from the politicians. We do get a lot of pushback from the public, though. One of the things I didn't get into, we have a partnership with Facebook and a partnership with TikTok, and particularly for the Facebook program, we are fact-checking things we publish on our website that basically Facebook internally surfaces for us as being possibly incorrect. We fact-check those, and we do a published article on our website, then we go back into the Facebook program, and 3 things happen after we mark it in the system. 1 is it gets downgraded in the algorithm, so you're less likely to see it. 2 is it gets a screen over the post. It says, this claim has been fact-checked in PolitiFact. Do you want to see the fact check? Click here. You don't have to. You can click, but you can also dismiss that screen and go straight to the item. Third, if it's a commercial website, they can't make money off that post if it's been fact-checked as being false or at least partially false. So what's different now for us is that it used to be that we would, that if somebody saw our articles, it was probably because they were trying to find us, or somebody suggested, a friend of theirs said, hey, check out this PolitiFact article. So they wanted to come to us and they wanted to learn. Now we're basically putting up screens in front of people who really don't want to hear from us. And so that does inspire a lot of negativity. One of the things I've been doing is I've been the person in charge of checking our email inbox for the past 10 or 12 years. So I've seen everything that comes in. And over time, there's a lot more negativity from our readers, which, and sometimes it's pretty brutal. You know, things not very nice are said. On the other hand, you know, I also realize that compared to the number of people who get those screens in front of their Facebook feeds, only a very small percentage are actually, you know, writing those negative things. So I sort of take some comfort in that it's only a very small percentage of people who really, really are angry. But it does exist, and, you know, it's not too fun for us to have to sit through that, but it's just part of the job. I think... Oh, okay.
What happens with the information when information changes, your facts, and how do you hold yourself accountable when you get it wrong?
Sure. So, you know, we do sometimes get it wrong, and we have a policy. We do corrections if there's something factually inaccurate. It's pretty unusual that we change a rating on the Truthometer. It does happen. It has happened in the past. But we have to be really convinced that our judgment was wrong. And that does sometimes happen, but it's not that common. And, you know, certainly we hear negative feedback about our ratings, but, you know, you have to present some really strong evidence for us to actually go and change that rating. But we do definitely have a corrections policy, and we do update stories if we get something wrong. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for your time.
Sure.
I wanted to ask, you mentioned that you're quite a small team managing these big projects with Facebook, with TikTok. So how do you manage the sheer volume of rhetoric that is coming, especially with the rhetoric that's bound to come out of our midterm elections?
Sure. So, you know, we kind of need to set our expectations. We can't possibly stop every little bit of misinformation that is out there. The good thing is that the process that we do is scalable. If you double the number of people that we have on our staff and double the number of editors, then we can get double the number of stories published. And so really it's just a question of, you know, money to basically hire enough people to do that. So, you know, if the market kind of desires even more than what we're doing now, we could do that. All you have to do is just pay us, and it's not rocket science. We do, on the misinformation side, the people who fact-check Facebook and TikTok, they do prioritize, and they can get this from the data that Facebook collects, the most viral posts. And so they can prioritize those. And, you know, if something gets 10 likes, then, you know, they might do it if it's interesting, but if there's something with 10,000 likes, then they're going to be more likely to do that. So it is possible to sort of triage things that are most important. And of course, we use our, you know, our news judgment too. If something is not particularly timely, we may not fact check it right then and there. But if there's something that's really in the news, then that is something we can prioritize.
You've been doing this for quite some time now. Have you noticed any change in the rhetoric of the politicians, for example, like inserting nearly 1 million?
So in the United States, and that's really all I can speak to from experience, you know, the idea of truth as being important in politics has only become more important over time. It was important when I started, but it's even more important now. Part of that, you know, Donald Trump is certainly, it was central to the coverage of him, you know, whether he was saying something that was truthful or not. He's certainly not the only politician who says things that are not entirely believable, but it did get a higher degree of scrutiny from the general media. So that was extremely important in terms of what people thought about in politics. And that's still true. I think the difference compared to when I started is that social media really fosters virality. Things can spread much more widely. It used to be people would send chain emails, and those would go around kind of fast, but not as fast as Twitter or Facebook can. That's a challenge for us because anybody can click forward or like on a social media post and not even think about it. It takes no skill or time to do that. For us, to be journalists, we have to do our research, and sometimes that means calling experts, sometimes that means looking at things in databases, or doing Google searches to find out basic information about things. So, you know, the fastest we can do something is a couple hours, and a couple hours in social media time is kind of slow. But I think by working with the social media platforms like Facebook and TikTok, that does give us a little bit of a leg up because they can, as I said, given our system, slow things down, slow the spread of things down. It doesn't, you know, still it's hard if something gets a 5-hour head start and only then can it slow down, but it's better than the alternative, which is just to come out, you know, with our own fact check and hope people see it.
Hi. Straight.
Oh, there you are.
Hi. Continuing on the last question,
sure.
Somehow, how and when do you fact check something that goes viral on social media, and especially if it has to do with a high-profile person, let's say Elon Musk?
So I will say one asterisk is that as part of the Facebook partnership, we cannot fact check through the partnership basically political figures like elected officials. Now, I guess Musk actually would qualify for us to fact check him through it, but you know, we can't fact check Joe Biden, Donald Trump, or any other politician. It's just the rules that are set up by Facebook and that. Now, certainly we can fact check them for our own purposes, and we do all the time. And we publish them on our website, but we can't work with Facebook to kind of diminish the spread of viral claims. So, I'm sorry, your question was... Right. Right.
Something he said and when?
Yes. So basically, we come in every morning around 9 o'clock and look at what's piled up overnight on the tool. And then in terms of politicians, you know, whatever we've seen ourselves on Twitter, the people have said or seen on the TV shows. So we start in the morning and do whatever we think is the most timely and newsworthy ones. So there is that lag between the time we go home the previous day and the time we come in the morning. Now, for a while, we had somebody who happened to be based in Japan, and so they were on a different time zone, and they could do some of that in the middle of the night, but then she moved back to the US. So in theory, we could have people in different time zones or work different shifts and not get that sort of, and not lose that head start in the middle of the night, but but we don't really have that now. So probably the biggest shortcoming for us is that if something comes out between about 6 o'clock p.m. East Coast time in the US until 9 o'clock, it is going to get a viral momentum during that period that we can't start to really attack until the sort of mid-morning or the early afternoon.
Over here. Thank you. I'd like to ask you if you get complaints from politicians or political parties about fact-checking one side more than the other.
And that is, it's a very reasonable question to ask. We try our best, particularly in things like, it's currently campaign season in the US with the election coming up in November, so there are specific races that we're covering, particularly Senate races, and we do try to keep a rough parity, equal number of checks for both sides, and we also try to do that in the presidential election. It's not perfect because sometimes candidates just don't say things that are controversial or interesting, and so we can't get the same number on each side. We do our best to try to fact check similar numbers of claims on both sides. We don't try to equalize, how many truths they get, how many falses they get, but we do want to give the same degree of scrutiny to both parties. We're not always perfect in that, unfortunately, just because of time constraints and what people say. We're sort of limited in what we can fact check, but we do try. Okay. I think we are about out of time, so thank you for coming, and thanks for your questions.